It's very nice to be here with you guys. I'm actually kind of on a tour right now. I was recently elected chair of the Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida, which is a project that I've been working on for several years now. We began to reform the Raza Unida Party in 2020, kind of like right as the pandemic was kicking off, when we were really in lockdown. And there were like five or six of us that started that project. 5 years later, I think that we've met most of our goals for the 5 years. There's close to 500 of us now in 29 different states across the country. Some of the patches that I have up here are for the Partido Nacional. All the patches are $5, regardless of their size or whatever. So if you guys see a patch you want, we're selling them and a whole bunch of other stuff to kind of help pay our way across the country as we go. In August, we took a trip through Texas and we did a 3-city tour in Texas, here in Michigan, which is where I'm originally from. I grew up in Lansing. We were in a community center on Monday. Yesterday we were at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti talking with students, and then today here. Then I'll take the next couple of days and visit with my mother. And then on Saturday we leave for Denver, Colorado, which is where we'll finish up our tour, and then head back to Arizona, where I live now. So I'm very excited to be here. I knew Santos. I met Santos when he was going through his graduate work. Were you in your PhD program then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've kind of watched his career. I think you're very lucky to have him as a professor. I recently I was teaching. Well, I taught on the university level for 17 years. The spring semester was my last semester. I decided that it was time to move on and do some different things. And then particularly with the political situation that is continuing to occur in the United States, I didn't really want to be in the classroom anymore. So, and I put 17 years into it. I feel pretty good about it. But yeah, so me being here with you guys is a part of that, part of me trying to do something a little bit different. This is a lecture that I developed, and I think it does do a good job kind of contextualizing in some ways what's happening right now, right? We have a tendency as a society to attempt to simplify everything. That person's bad, that person's a racist, that's why they think those things, right? Because they don't like me because I'm brown, or, that type of thing. And all of that may be true, right? That person may be bad, that person may be a racist. Maybe they don't like us simply because of the color of our skin. But when we allow ourselves, I think, to participate in that, we're actually letting them off the hook, I think. Because whether we realize it or not, I think in a lot of ways we are excusing their behavior by simply saying they're too stupid to know what they're doing, right? But I'm here to tell you that they know exactly what they're doing, and they are not stupid. And the sooner we sort of kind of figure that out, then I think that we're able to adjust our tactics and our strategy in terms of how it is that we intend on defending our community, how it is that we intend on supporting people who are being terrorized. Well, actually, at this point, I think that we're all being terrorized, to be completely honest with you. I don't think it has anything to do right now in October of 2025 with your immigration status. If you look Mexican, you are in trouble, right? And it just, so, I mean, I understand the undocumented part of it, I do, but I think that the situation has slipped a little bit past that, right? This is an attack on an entire group of people. And it's an open attack, and it's an unapologetic attack, right? This is a continuation of Indian erasure, genocide, removal policies that this country was founded on, and let's be clear, they never went away, right? And so I think that that's also an important piece of this whole thing, or this particular moment in time, is to really keep in mind that there is nothing shocking about what they are doing. They've been doing this, and when I say they, I'm talking about European Americans, right, or Europeans, right, who have come here, who came here as settlers. But they're very clear about that. They have been doing this from the moment they stepped foot on this land, and they have done it for the last 500 years. And so this isn't an anomaly. It's not a blip, right? This is business as usual, right? I would actually say that probably the period of my lifetime, from the late 1960s until now, has been the anomaly, right? Because it was a moment that was created, a bubble, a moment that was created from a very intense sort of domestic insurgency, right? That very much challenged and shook the foundation of this country. And as a result, this country was forced to do things like the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Act, right? Which are all now, as you know, being systematically dismantled, right? So it's a return to normality for this country, what's happening currently. This is not dystopia, right? I mean, the dystopia is the reality that indigenous people, indigenous descended people live in this country. That's the dystopia. So, you know, and that kind of leads us into this first slide. It says here that history does not make power, power makes history. And this is a quote from an author. His name is Pachu Mais. He's actually from here in Michigan. He's written several books. Pachu is a house painter by trade. But he's what Gramsci would have called an organic intellectual, right? So it comes up through the working class, and they teach themselves these things. And then, as a result, they're able to communicate this to other workers. Well, he says history does not make power, power makes history. All right, so what does that mean? Anyone? No, I mean it really anyone. Anyone can answer this question. Go ahead.
Like typically the winners of battles are the ones that write their history.
Okay, that is I think that is a real interpretation of this quote. I saw a hand back over here.
The more power you hold, the more remembered you will be.
Say the last part again. The more power, I'm a little,
The
yeah.
more power you hold through your lifetime, the more remembered you will be.
Okay, yes, I think that is also true too, right? So, I think that both of those things are good. What I want to do is lay another piece of this on here for you, okay? So, how long have indigenous people, or the people that we recognize as indigenous, lived on this continent?
It's been a while since I've learned the figure, but I think 14,000 years.
14,000 years, sometimes people say 30, sometimes they say 100,000 years, right? I mean, it's been a long time. And the point is, right, that we have a lot of history here, right? Civilizations have risen, civilizations have fallen, right? Libraries have been built, great cities have been built, right? We have a long, long history here in the Americas, indigenous people do, right? How much power do we have? That's actually the easier of the two questions, because we have zero power. We have zero power, but we have 30,000 years of history, right? History doesn't make power. Power makes history. And so when we begin to really think about what that means, what we realize is that there's a whole group of people, millions of people that live in North America, Central America, and South America, who are completely politically disenfranchised. And I'll give you an example of how that's true. There is not one border in this hemisphere that was drawn by indigenous people. Every border in North America, Central America, and South America was drawn by Europeans. Every single one of them. Because they have power, right? Not history, but they have power. So we have history, but we have no power. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna frame this, the rest of this discussion, within the context of this particular article. Now, the reason that I think that this article is so important is because it was written 21 years ago. That's why it's important now, I think, because it was written 21 years ago by this guy, Samuel P. Huntington, right? And so Huntington is, you know, in terms of like, you know, Western intellectuals or whatever, he's legit, right? He's somebody that people respected. He was advisors to presidents, and he sat on big commissions, and he, you know, formulated policy. In the late 1990s, or probably in the middle 1990s, Huntington wrote a book that was called Clash of Civilizations. And in that book, he said that the next biggest threat to American political hegemony in the world would be the Muslim, the Arab world, the Arab nations, right? And then just a few short years after that, the United States becomes embroiled in the longest conflict of its history with Arab nations, right? Well, you know, that part of the world, right? So you have Huntington as sort of this like predictor, right, of what's going to happen. In 2004, was there anybody here that was born before 2004? Yeah. Few, okay. The hands keep going. The hands get smaller and smaller every time I ask that question, and I'm just like, okay. So, but the thing I want you to keep in mind is this: as we go through these slides, this has all happened within your guys' lifetime, right? That's the important thing to keep in mind here. So Huntington says here, this is the article that comes out. It comes out in the journal that he started. It's called Foreign Policy, right? And he writes, the persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into two people, two cultures, and two languages. Unlike past immigrant groups, Mexicans and Latinos have not assimilated into mainstream U.S. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but this is the point that Huntington's bringing out. He says, instead, U.S. culture forming instead their own political and linguistic enclaves from Los Angeles to Miami, and rejecting the Anglo-Protestant values that built the American dream, the United States ignores this challenge at its peril, right? Now, this guy is not nobody. You know what I'm saying? Like, when, you know, Ronald Reagan needed some advice, this is somebody he would call. When Jimmy Carter needed some advice, this is somebody he would call, right? So, regardless of Republican or Democrat, this is somebody that they listen to. Shortly after this article came out, this book came out, Who Are We? And let's see if I can pull if the Wikipedia page will come up. It will not come up on the screen, but that's okay. So there's a Wikipedia page for this, and basically what it says that is, in describing the American identity, Huntington first contests the notion of the country, that the country is, as often repeated, a nation of immigrants. That's first and foremost, as he says that the United States is not a nation of immigrants, right? But that, he writes that America's founders were not immigrants, but settlers, which I think is an important distinction, right? Because if you go out and you say that in Palestine, they're being settled, right? That Palestine is suffering under settler colonialism, even here in the United States, they might throw your ass in jail. I mean, really, and if you were over there, they'll just fucking kill you, right? So, what Huntington is saying is that, oh, these guys that came from England, they're not immigrants. They're not, the rest of you guys are immigrants, right? Those guys are settlers. They came here to create a whole new country, right? important distinction. Because when we say they were settlers, we get in trouble for saying that, right? Like we do. People get mad at us, you know, they start yelling at us and saying really rude things, right? But Huntington, their main guy, this is their man, right? This is their guy. He's saying they were settlers, not immigrants. So they came to North America to establish a new society, as opposed to migrating from one existing society to another as immigrants do. What's the problem with that logic? If they came here to establish a new society, but unlike other immigrants, people who are immigrants who come from one society to another society, what's the problem with that logic? Yeah. Completely ignores it, right? I mean, completely dismisses it. It's not even a part of the conversation because there was nobody here, right? Nobody here. That's why there was no genocide, because there was nobody here. It was a vast, untamed wilderness, right? And so what we see right from the beginning is that Huntington is putting us in a very specific ideological position, right? And that ideological position is what? What do you think it is? You know when people say there's no such thing as a wrong answer? There is a wrong answer. It's called tuna fish, because it's not tuna fish, right? But what is it? What's the ideological position he's putting us in?
Us as in like settlement, or us as in like indigenous?
Well, which one? I mean, us, like we're talking about us right now, right? As Americans, right? As citizens of the United States, or we're talking about the United States, right? So what position is Huntington putting us in?
He's making you reevaluate, the pillars of what,
You're like one word away from
Yeah.
answering this question. Yeah, he's making us reevaluate the pillars of.
identity.
That's right. Of who we are, right? Of who are we? That is what he's doing. What he's saying is all of these other people are full of it, right? We came here, we built this is ours. That is absolutely what he's saying. This small little Harvard professor, right? Just this tiny little white man. He's like, this is ours, right? And he means it. He does. He means it. So we go, I know what I have to do here. Hold on a second. We go on to the next slide. So his thesis really is America was created by 17th and 18th century settlers who were overwhelmingly white, British, and Protestant. Okay. Their values, institutions, and culture provide the foundation for and shape the development of the United States in the following centuries. Is this a true statement? No. You're saying no. Why? Why is it not a true statement?
Because how the society and the culture has evolved throughout the years does not mean that all of the white culture is been like relevant.
Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, I certainly think that's an aspect of it, right? What's being left out here? Again, yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's true, but it's kind of lying through omission because the like ideological project was, so centrally about committing, ethnic cleansing in order to like tame the land and make it their own.
You're right. It is true through omission, right? Because these people came, right? And as we'll see in a second, I mean, I think that Huntington has an argument for saying that there's this Anglo-Protestant thing that's happening here in the United States, right? I don't think that we can really deny that. This negates land theft. It negates genocide, right? It negates the contributions of indigenous people to these. It negates 400 years of slavery, right? These people that came during that time, they're not the ones that did most of the building. And they're certainly not the ones that did most of the building afterwards, right? I mean, you cannot summarily dismiss 400 years of slavery. I mean, the same way that you cannot summarily dismiss the amount of money, the amount of gold and silver that was taken from the Americas by the Spanish. An amount of precious metals that fueled the growth of capitalism until Nixon, the President of the United States, took the US off the gold standard. Some 400 years later, right? That's a lot of gold. That's a lot of silver, right? All taken from here. So when we think about what it is, right, that Huntington is saying, I mean, what he's saying through omission is that these other contributions are irrelevant, right? We did this, we thought it up, it's ours, we're gonna keep it, no one's gonna take it from us, right? So challenging the myth of American identity. And you know, I wanna reiterate to you that Samuel Huntington is not some crazy dude in the basement with a light bulb swinging over his head. You know what I'm saying? Typing out like manifestos on a rickety old typewriter. This guy's a Harvard professor for 50 years. I mean, this is the top of the heap right here in the way that this sort of intellectual thought is developed, right? So Huntington's claim is that the US was built by Anglo-Protestants whose values define American identity. Do not forget that, right? That is key to this. Mexican and Latino immigrants do not assimilate, and as a result of their non-assimilation, threaten this identity. But the reality is that the US was built on indigenous land and through African enslavement, not just Anglo values. That Mexican culture and governance predate the US Southwest, meaning that the border crossed us, not the other way around. One of the things that is often forgotten in this country, I mean, I can understand why it is that even if you want to like throw the Spanish into this mix, although I'm not really sure what we gained from by doing that, they were here in the Americas 100 years before the British ever set foot on this land. For 100 years, they were here colonizing and doing their work, which meant that the British had 100 years to study the efforts of the Spanish before they came here, right? Huntington's fear of Latino culture is a fear of decolonization, not a real threat to American stability. And so the key question as we get to this part of the article is, if Anglo-Protestant culture is the foundation of the US, why has it relied on genocide, land theft, and forced assimilation to maintain its power? I mean, if Anglo-Protestant culture is really the foundation of it, but this is the way that it maintains power, does that mean that these things are automatic outputs of Anglo-Protestant culture? So how we apply this, you know, how we begin to think about it in terms of the work that you do as students, in terms of the work that you do as emerging intellectuals, right? We think about these three questions. Who are we? What is our material condition? And what can be done about it? From Professor Ronaldo Macias, in his work, he says that these are the three questions of Xicano Studies, right? That if you're doing work in the field of Xicano Studies and you're not dealing with those questions, then you're not really doing work in the field of Xicano Studies, right? But what's important is that along with these three questions, you have these four dimensions to each one of these. Now, if you think about your own research, lots of times we'll come up with questions, research questions or whatever, but then you think to yourself, or as you start doing it, you're like, this isn't broad enough to actually do, to do the kind of research that I want to, how do I develop it? So what Macias is saying is that for each one of these questions, if you add these 4 dimensions in, what this does is this leads us to this inevitable piece, right? So when we ask the question, who are we? How do we historicize that question, right? How do we place it within a historical context? Who are we as indigenous descended people in the United States or in the Americas, right? One way to answer that is that we are conquered, colonized, subjugated people, right? That we live in a time period that is not one of our making. Therefore, we are people out of time, right? Because we haven't had a chance to develop from the moment that this conquest takes place until now. We live in a settler history, right? We don't live in indigenous history. So how is it then that we begin to return to history? Then we contextualize that, right? What does that mean now? What does it mean right now that this is happening? Well, part of what it means is that there are masked men roving the streets of this country, abducting women, right? Zip tying children, brutalizing people in the hallways of the courts of law, right? I mean, this is our context right now. And so then we begin to politicize it. What does that mean politically for us? How do we answer this back? I mean, do we do it through the Democrats, right? Do we do it through this? I mean, do we do it through not voting? I mean, do we begin to answer it back by forming our own political entities that then begin to work within the community to build the kind of power that we need, not necessarily to compete with them, but to think about how it is that we return to this moment, right? This return to history in a way that allows us to be a definable, sovereign group of people, right? And then finally, that leads us to indigenize, right? What does all of this mean for a return to this concept of indigeneity, right? Who are we as indigenous people? I mean, some people will say, I can't really say I'm an indigenous person because I don't know what tribe I'm from. Okay, I mean, but I can tell you that those guys that are gonna snatch you off the street, you sure look Indian to them, right? So, I mean, if you want to quibble about what tribe you're from, you go ahead and do that, because that's a quibble that we're having with each other, not with the people that are beating our ass out in the street, right? They know who we are. So, these statistics are from 2003, 2004, but I think that they help very nicely set up what's happening right now. So these are the statistics that Huntington was using when he was making his dire predictions about the end of the United States, right? As an Anglo-Protestant nation. It says nationally in 2000, 1 out of 7 or 14% of 18-year-olds were Latino, okay? And that in 2008, Latinos are projected to represent 21% of public high school graduates. It was a little bit higher, but I mean, that's significant, right? Because a lot of decisions are made based on how many high school graduates, how many kids are graduating from high school. What's important to know about this number is that for white high school graduates and for Latino or Xicano or however you want to put it, high school graduates, that at this point in time, those numbers were going like this, right? The number of white graduates was going down and the number of Latino graduates was going up dramatically. Latinos represent a much larger share of the US population at younger brackets. This is still true, that the median age of Latinos in 2004 was 26. For whites, it was 35, right? Currently, there are 11 million school-aged Latinos in the US. In 2020, there will be 16 million. Right before the pandemic, the largest group of first-time college students entering college campuses all across the country were overwhelmingly Latino, right? In school after school after school. Then the pandemic hit, and those numbers went down. They went back down. Although I think that they're kind of starting to rebound, right? Just at a moment when the current administration is looking at eliminating all programs that have anything to do with, what they call diversity, right? So we look at these, and these are from 2004. This is all Hispanics, this is female, this is male. You see that the big population bubble is right here, but the next one is here. So, these are the children of these people, right? And as they continue to move up, we'll take a look at this in a minute. We'll look at it a little bit more. For whites, it was from right here, 40 to 50. That was the median age. And then, where you can see that the difference is here, right, with the children. They weren't having as many kids. And they're still not, right? Which I think is one of the reasons why, this is just my opinion, although I think if we really wanted to talk about it, we could probably really come to the base of it. It's one of the reasons why the Supreme Court did what it did, right? They want people to have more babies. It's even a conversation among the Trump administration about basically paying people to have babies, right? Incredible. So, first generation Hispanics, median age 34. You can see here's the bubble. Second generation, huge, right? 0 to 10. We're talking about millions of kids. And then even here for third generation, right? The biggest line is still here in 0 to 4 in 2004. That's a lot of kids. That's a lot of babies, right? That's not a lot of people flowing across the border, although that's a significant number too, right? That's a lot of babies. Huntington's fear is that Latinos will form a separate political and cultural entity demanding autonomy. Mexican immigration will lead to a reconquest of the Southwest. The truth is that Xicano Studies teaches self-determination, not separatism. I taught Xicano Studies for 17 years. I never had a lecture that said, let's separate, right? But I have had lots of lectures that said, this is what self-determination is. The Southwest was stolen in 1848. And efforts to reclaim cultural and political power are about justice, not division. So the Mexican-American War happens in 1848, and the Southwest was taken from Mexico. Although I think it's a bit of an overstatement. Really, the Southwest was taken first from indigenous people by Mexico, and then it was taken from Mexico by the United States. So I think what's really important here, and I keep meaning to rewrite this sentence, but then I keep forgetting to do it, is that in 1848, another piece, a huge piece of indigenous land was taken over by the United States. The real fear is Chicanos rejecting assimilation and organizing for their collective interests. I believe that is actually very true. And so the question is, why is political power acceptable when controlled by Anglo elites, but a threat when used by historically oppressed communities? Why can Samuel Huntington say that they were settlers, but if anybody else says it, it's a problem, right? So this is a quote from the article. He writes, Miami is the most Hispanic large city in the 50 US states. He wrote this in 2004. Over the course of 30 years, the 30 years preceding 2004, Spanish speakers, overwhelmingly Cuban, established their dominance in virtually every aspect of the city's life, fundamentally changing its ethnic composition, culture, politics, and language. The Hispanization of Miami is without precedent in the history of US cities. Okay. This is probably the one sentence, it's maybe why I put it in here, that I think is true, right? This really happened, and it still happens. Cubans took over Miami. Okay, That's cool, right? 21 years ago, Miami was the largest one. Is that true now? Is Miami the most Hispanic city in the United States now? No, which one is? LA, right? In every way, numbers, percentage-wise, the whole thing. I think it might be the second most populated Mexican city in the world. Or if it's not the second, then it's the third. I think it might be Mexico City, Guadalajara, Los Angeles, right? So he goes on to write that the Hispanization of the Southwest has been slower, unrelenting, and politically driven, which is a very, I mean, that's a very charged statement, right? Like, who's it politically driven by, right? I mean, whose politics are driving this other than the politics of environmental degradation that come from the United States as we strip mine entire countries for lithium and all of these other things, right? So it says the Cuban influx into Florida was intermittent and responded to the policies of the Cuban government. Okay. Mexican immigration, on the other hand, is continuous, includes a large illegal component, and shows no sign of tapering. The Hispanic, that is largely Mexican, population of Southern California far exceeds in number, but has yet to reach the proportions of the Hispanic population of Miami, though it is increasing rapidly. That has, this whole thing has flipped in the last 20 years, in your guys' lifetime, right? That's the part I think is important to keep in mind, is that all of this has taken place within your lifetime. So this is from the Pew Hispanic Center, which is a very good research center. I would say for you guys, if you're doing research, particularly, on a lot of different subjects, but they have a lot of good data sets for the Xicano Latino community. They write, there were 62.5 million Latinos in the United States in 2021, accounting for approximately 19% of the total population. In 1980, with a population of 14.8 million, Hispanics made up just 7% of the total US population. So in 2021, 62.5 million. In 1980, 14.8 million. In 1970, 7 million. And in 1930, there were 3 million. There were 3 million Mexicans in the United States in 1930. And the reason that I go back to 1930 is because that's the very first census that the United States recorded whether or not somebody was Mexican. So up until that point, I guess that they were all white or something like that, right? So like 3 million in 1930, 62.5 million in 2020. So the number, it gets bigger, right? If you look at this map, I love this map, right? This map is cool. 2020 census, all right? So they were just talking about the war in 1848. If you start here and you just draw a line straight down to where Texas and Louisiana meet, that's pretty much the landmass that was taken, right? That's like 1/4 of this country, basically. And you look at the legend here, where the darkest parts are at, that's 80% and above, right? There is no part of that map, well, there's a few spots, but very few, where the population isn't 20% and above. That's a lot of people, right? See, the thing is that Huntington wasn't wrong. That's the thing. I mean, he wasn't. He was absolutely right that if we don't stop this, there's going to be too many of them. And at a certain point, there's just going to be too many of them to reverse it. There's too many to reverse it right here. There's too many. Are any of you from Texas? Yeah?
Well, I got family from Texas,
Down in the valley?
yeah. Yeah, in the valley.
Okay, so we all know, those of us who have been there, that this isn't 80% and above. This is like 99% and above, right? I mean, this is down along here, and if you look at this, right? I mean, what we're looking at is a repopulation. So when these guys start talking about, you know, the Reconquista and all this other kind of stuff, right? They're not just being assholes, right? Well, they are assholes, but they're not just being assholes because, well, they say numbers don't lie, right? Numbers don't lie. This is real. This is 2020. This is 5 years ago. And what's really kind of crazy about numbers is that the bigger they get, right? So like if you double from 1 to 2, I mean that's a big percentage increase. But if you have 62 million people and that number doubles, that's a lot of people, right? So when we think about what Huntington is saying, and we think about what's happening right now, 20 years after he wrote this article, these guys are saying, if we don't get rid of some of these people, we're gonna have a problem, right? Because they know already that they have a problem. In the 1930s, there were 3 million Mexicans. What happened in the 1930s? There was a repatriation, and they got rid of a lot of people, right? In the 1950s, there was a repatriation, and they got rid of a lot of people. If there are 62 million of us now, can you imagine how many people there would be in this country who were Latino or Mexican descent, right? That, I mean, how many of us there would be if they hadn't gotten rid of them? There have been estimates, and I've read these different articles that talk about the population of the Americas at the time that the Spanish landed. And what they estimate is that if the Spanish had never come here, and the disease factors and the things that happened, that there would be as many indigenous people in this world as there are Chinese people. That's mind-blowing, right? So we have this piece that's going on. So what's really, I think, also interesting is that this is the same map, it's bigger, but what I did was I overlaid another map of Native American reservations here in the United States, right? And so you can see they're the sort of green areas that are here, right? Now, that's not a lot of land, right? And it's not a lot of people. In 2010, the United States Census allowed people to do this thing where they could say what they were, right? And as a result of that, 175,494 people said that they were Mexican American Indian. This was in 2010, all right? What that did for the 2010 census was that made Mexican American Indian the third largest tribal grouping in the country, all right? So, let's think about how this plays out, all right? We know here that this is the Latino population, right? But we can also see that that population is exploding. And then we see here that this is the indigenous population, right? Okay. But what if all of this is really the indigenous population? Changes things a little bit, doesn't it? Right? Because one of the pieces of the rhetoric that we accept is that we're foreigners to this country. But we are in fact not foreigners to this country, because remember what I said at the beginning? Every border in this continent was drawn by Europeans. It wasn't drawn by us, right? It was drawn by them. It was drawn by them for very specific reasons, right? So, can we legitimately say, or can they legitimately say, that we don't belong to this land? I I don't think that they can. I don't think it's their place to say that, right? So we have a discussion that's going on, and that discussion includes this: 175,494 people who think they're Indian, right? Now, what we do know is that numbers like this, they don't tend to get smaller, they tend to get bigger. I would also bet that of these 175,494 people, that many of them are just like you. And they sat in a classroom just like this one, and they heard a lecture that was similar to this, which is why they think that, right? Which is why ethnic studies is dangerous, which is why Xicano Studies is dangerous, right? Because it's not about separatism, it's about self-determination, right? If you are part of a conquered, colonized group of people, how do you reclaim this perspective of self-determination, this right to self-determination? You have to reclaim it by acknowledging who you are, by thinking about your material condition, right? And then understanding what it is that you can do about it. So we go on, we move on. Huntington's argument is that Latinos should assimilate into Anglo-American culture. The failure to do so will create economic and political instability. I think that, I mean, the one thing that I do think is that I think Latinos do assimilate into American culture. I think we assimilate into it pretty like hardcore, really, you know, for the most part. Yeah, I mean, think about it, right? Even in the last election, I mean, all those fools that voted for Trump, right? That's assimilation, man, you know, because they think that they're gonna get something out of that, right? And they got something out of it. So how we serve the people instead. Xicano Studies provides political education, connecting past struggles to present conditions. Community self-reliance. Instead of waiting for institutions to recognize our history, we build our own schools, cultural centers, and mutual aid networks. Cultural survival as resistance. Rather than assimilation, we expand bilingual education, strengthen community-based organizing, and reject erasure. All of these things are things that the federal government helped people with over the last 50 years. The federal government no longer helps people with those things, right? Does that mean that those things have to stop? They do not have to stop. But what it does mean is that we have to take some responsibility to make sure that they continue. And not by telling the federal government that they have to give us money, because those guys ain't going to give us any money, right? As a matter of fact, they might just like deport us for our troubles of showing up, you know? So instead, what we have to do is think about how it is that we begin to build structures in our community that provide these services, right? I mean, all of you are like me and like Santos and like Alejandro in the back. You're very lucky to be here. And I know you know that, and I'm not trying to put some big trip on you or whatever, right? But it is possible, it is entirely possible that we are coming to the end of you guys being able to be here, right? I mean, it is not without, I mean, it's entirely possible. I mean, this whole experiment of educating young Black or young Latino or young Asian students to help them find ways to integrate into mainstream society could very well be coming to an end. I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, if I were white and I was like in charge of this, I would consider this a failed experiment. Because I would have been like, we didn't get out of this what we wanted out of this, right? We wanted brown faces with white attitudes. And what happens is that they're getting a lot of brown faces with really bad attitudes, right? Like, I have a bad attitude about this. And I mean, I think about it. I'm not interested in being a part of that landscape in any way, shape, or form, right? So we have to do this. But what's great about you all and about us, right, is that we're gathering what I would term a very specific set of bourgeois skills that allows us to build these organizations, right? Because we know how to do that, right? We know how to run farms, right? We know how to do all of the other things that you guys are doing, the things that you're studying in this class. So then the key question is, who benefits when Chicanos are forced to abandon their culture, and who suffers when we reclaim it? Good question, right? I mean, who suffers when we reclaim our culture? So it's my guy, Bibi Netanyahu, right? This man is a genocidal maniac. He is a lunatic masquerading as a human being. I mean, there is no question about it, right? He writes in 1993 in this book, A Place Among the Nations, Israel and the World. This is what he writes. This is what he's writing about us, right? He says, the United States is not exempt from this potential nightmare. In a decade or two, the southwest region of America is likely to be predominantly Hispanic. He was right about that. We'll put that in, he was right about that column. Mainly as a result of continuous immigration from Mexico. He was wrong about that. It is not inconceivable that in this community, champions of the Palestinian principle could emerge. These are dangerous words, right? This is like a threat. I mean, in the fullness of time, as you look back, this is like a threat. These would demand not merely equality before the law or naturalization or even Spanish as a first language. Instead, they would say that since they form a local majority in the territory, which was, again, right, forcibly taken from Mexico in the War of 1848, it's really funny how nobody denies that, right? They don't deny it. They just say, oh, yeah, that happened. And they're like, oh, it's lunchtime, right? They deserve a state of their own. That's crazy. How many of you in here have ever thought that Latinos in the United States deserve a state of their own? Raise your hand. There you go. I stand alone, right? But he thinks it. He thinks that people could think that, right? This guy right here, who's responsible for the just unimaginable Holocaust that is happening in Gaza right now. He thinks that there might be those among us, right? You radicals, who think that we should have our own state. He goes on to say, this scenario may sound far-fetched today, but it will not necessarily appear that way tomorrow, especially if the Palestinian principle is allowed to continue to spread, which it surely will if a second Palestinian state comes into being. How closely your struggle in the minds of your enemies is associated with liberation struggles around the world. How closely it is. And yet we don't see it here. We can't see what's like right in front of us, right? Because of assimilation, which is why I think Huntington is full of crap when he says that. But when we come here, right, we come here to school and you get a professor like Santos, right? And then they bring people in. This is where we begin to explore new ideas. We begin to think about things in a different way, read new literature, right? That allows us to make these connections. So Xicano Studies is a tool for political consciousness and liberation. Why they fear Xicano Studies. Huntington and his supporters fear that educating Latinos about their history will lead to political action. That is a very well-founded fear on their part. It is absolutely 100% true. The first time that you hear somebody say that you are an indigenous person, that you're an indigenous descended person, and that you have a right to be here, the immigration debate changes fundamentally, right? We are not illegal. And it doesn't have anything to do with no human being is illegal, although that is also true too, right? We have always resided here. always, right? We have history here. We might not have power, but we have history. And when people begin to understand that, then they are forced by their own conscience to act on that knowledge. Education that empowers Chicanos threatens a system that depends on our erasure. Also true, right? Why we need Xicano Studies. It's not just an academic study, it is a tool for movement building, right? We don't just come to these classes because they're required, right? We come to these classes because we are here to learn about who we are. That's why we're here, right? That's why all of you are here. I mean, I look into this classroom, I can see why it is that you're here, because you have questions that you wanted answered. And so you came to this class as a result of that, right? It develops historical consciousness, connects students to organizing, and creates leadership in the fight for self-determination. Not in the fight for separatism, but in the fight for self-determination. It exposes and heightens contradictions in the education system, showing how knowledge is controlled and who serves it, right? If education is meant to liberate, then why does the system fight so hard to keep Xicano Studies out of schools? I think that's a very, very good question. And so finally, my boy Sammy P closes the article by saying this: there is no Americano dream. There is only the American dream, created by an Anglo-Protestant society, and Mexican Americans will share in that dream and in that society only if they dream in English. So that's his take on this, right? They made it, they built it, they maintained it, and the rest of us need to fall in line, which is really what we're hearing right now, right? Fall in line, fall in line, don't rock the boat. If you say you're against me, you're a terrorist, you know? I mean, which is why it's even more important now than ever to say what it is that you're for and say what it is that you're against. I mean, we cannot afford to be terrorized into silence, because that silence will be unending. It will never stop. The class that you're taking right now is a very important class, right? Because what it's doing is it's giving you a glimpse into a reality that you are completely bound up in, that you may not have even realized was happening around you, right? Because of the way that we're disenfranchised, not just from our own history and our own culture, but just disenfranchised. I mean, we think about what it is that we don't know. Every time that I taught one of these classes for the last 17 years, the first question that I would ask students is, why did you take this class, right? And we would go around the whole class. And almost to the person, every Xicana or Chicano or Latino would say, I took this class because I don't know anything about who I am, and I wanted to learn my history and about my culture. Almost to the person, for 17 years, I've heard students say this. It is mind-blowing, right? This is your opportunity to learn about who you are and about your history. And I applaud you for taking this class, I really do. It was good. That's also the end of my lecture.